Welcome back, listeners. You found your way back to the deep dive.
And as always, we're diving deep into the stories behind, well, let's just say, some pretty intriguing books.
The books that, shall we say, maybe made some folks a little nervous back in the day.
The kind of books that get whispered about, yeah.
Exactly. And this time, we're going all the way back to the Middle Ages for episode 231.
The magic of the Middle Ages, hidden orders, occult cosmologies, and the forbidden war between heaven and hell. Buckle up, folks.
And to guide us through this labyrinth of medieval magic, we've got Viktor Rydberg's book, The Magic of the Middle Ages. It was published back in 1865, but it still packs a punch when it comes to understanding, well, how those folks saw the world.
It really does. The sources I shared with you, it's like they've given us this incredible blueprint of the medieval mind.
And it's not just one thing, is it? It's their entire worldview.
Right. Cosmology, the church, those scholars poring over ancient texts, even just everyday folks and their superstitions.
And magic. Always magic.
Oh, absolutely. Magic was the thread that tied it all together, really.
So that's our mission today, right? Unraveling those threads, seeing how Rydberg lays it all out, and maybe, just maybe, uncover a few surprises along the way.
I think we're bound to find a few surprises. The Middle Ages, they weren't exactly known for playing it safe.
All right, then let's get into it. To even start talking about medieval magic, we first have to wrap our heads around, well, their version of the universe.
Right, what Rydberg calls the cosmic philosophy of the time. A profoundly structured understanding of the world it was.
So paint us a picture. How do they see things up there in the heavens?
Well, imagine the Earth, right smack dab in the center of everything.
Okay, stationary Earth. Got it.
And around it, 10 heavens. Imagine them as these giant crystal spheres, one nestled inside the other.
10 heavens. Wow. And they were all just spinning around the Earth.
All except the outermost one, yeah. That one was the boundary, the edge of creation itself.
And what was it called?
The Empyrean. Heaven of fire, they called it.
Heaven of fire. That's pretty intense.
Oh, it was. Completely inaccessible to us mere mortals. Only the pure light of God could exist there.
Where God himself resided.
In all his triune majesty. And the other 9 heavens, those celestial spheres, they were constantly rotating, creating this incredible heavenly music.
Like a symphony of the cosmos.
Exactly, a cosmic hymn of praise, constantly ascending to God.
Okay, so we've got this beautifully ordered system. Earth at the center, 10 heavens around it, God at the very top. What else?
Well, let's talk about what's in those heavens. Right beneath the Empyrean, you had the crystal sphere, the primum mobile. It was the outermost moving sphere, the engine that drove all the other celestial movements.
The prime mover.
Makes sense.
Then you had the heaven of the fixed stars. But these stars, well, they weren't like the ones we think of.
How such?
They were thought to be made of the purest elements, so light, so refined, that they were weightless.
Weightless stars. Huh. Never thought of it like that.
And then, of course, you had the planets, the 7 wanderers of the night sky.
And each one had its own sphere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Picture this. An angel descending from heaven down to earth. It would pass through these 7 planetary spheres.
7 spheres. Like checkpoints on a celestial journey.
Right. Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Sun, which they considered the queen of the planets, Venus, Mercury, and finally, the Moon.
And beneath the moon, that's where things got a little, well, earthly.
Exactly. Earth's atmosphere, the lands and seas, and everything in this material world.
Yeah.
Composed of the 4 prime elements.
Fire, air, water, earth. The building blocks of the universe.
Exactly. But here's where things get really interesting. In this medieval worldview, it wasn't the elements themselves that held the power.
Oh, so where did that power come from?
Directly from God. All power was ultimately spiritual, flowing down from the divine.
Okay, so God was the source. But how did that power reach everything else?
Through intermediaries, spiritual beings, angels.
Right, angels. They weren't just sitting around playing harps, were they?
Not at all. They were like these divine messengers, these agents of God's will. They kept the heavens moving, guided the planets in their orbits, even infused the elements with their energies.
Even plants, metals, stones, they all had their own guardian angels.
That's right. It was a profoundly spiritual understanding of the natural world.
So we've got this picture of a perfectly ordered universe, divinely powered, and teeming with angels. Sounds almost idyllic.
It does, doesn't it? And that's how they saw the early state of humanity, too. Paradise, pure bliss.
A world where everything was in harmony.
Exactly. Humans lived in perfect communion with God. Their will was good. Their understanding of the divine was pure and intuitive.
And God would even come down to earth and hang out with them.
Right. Rydberg paints this picture of God walking with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden.
Like a friendly chat in the garden. But we know that peace didn't last forever.
No, it didn't, and that's where things take a turn for the dramatic.
Right.
Because enter Lucifer.
Lucifer, the fallen angel.
The light bringer, the morning star. He was one of the most powerful angels, second only to God.
But pride got the better of him.
Pride and envy, yeah. He wanted to overthrow God to take his place.
And he managed to convince other angels to join his rebellion.
Oh, yeah. Angels of all ranks, from all the heavens, even some associated with the earth. It was a full-blown angelic war.
Angels fighting angels.
Oh.
Sounds like something straight out of a, well, I guess it is straight out of a religious text.
Rydberg talks about the Book of Revelation, Michael leading God's armies against Lucifer. Epic stuff.
And Lucifer, of course, lost.
He did. But God didn't destroy him. Instead, he gave him a limited amount of freedom.
Freedom to do what?
To wage war against God's creation, to try to corrupt and destroy everything good.
So, Lucifer's fall. That was the beginning of all the bad stuff.
Pretty much. And his first target, humanity.
Right, the fall of man.
The original sin. It brought God's curse upon humanity and the earth. The world was split in two, divided between good and evil.
And it wasn't just a metaphorical division, was it?
No. Death entered the world. Hell opened up beneath the earth. And Lucifer continued to mock God, trying to imitate him, to create his own twisted version of creation.
With the help of all those fallen angels who'd sided with him.
Exactly. They became his demons, his dark court, and they still had power over the stars, the planets, even the elements.
So they were constantly battling against the good angels for control of the cosmos.
A never-ending cosmic war playing out across all of creation.
And humanity, we were caught right in the middle.
Exactly. Imagine it. You're born into a world already cursed, threatened by suffering and death, but even worse, the constant threat to your soul.
The demons, they were always lurking, trying to tempt us, to lead us astray.
And we weren't exactly well equipped to resist them. Human will was weakened by the fall, our reason was clouded, even our emotions were vulnerable to their influence.
So basically, we were sitting ducks.
Pretty much. Rydberg points out that this worldview, it really created a sense of, well, almost despair. It felt like humanity was doomed to fail.
Destined for eternal damnation. Not exactly a cheery outlook.
No, not at all. But the church, well, they offered a glimmer of hope.
The church, they were like the cavalry riding in to save the day.
More like a fortress, a refuge in a world overrun by demons. Rydberg calls it the magic circle of salvation.
Outside the church, there is no salvation. That was their big motto, right?
Exactly. It was the only way to escape Lucifer's clutches.
But it wasn't just about hiding away, was it? The church had its own weapons, its own magic to fight back.
Oh, absolutely. The Mass, for example. That was their ultimate weapon.
The Mass. How so?
It wasn't just a symbolic ceremony. They believed it was a literal spiritual battle. The bread and wine transformed into Christ's body and blood.
A direct infusion of divine power.
Precisely. It gave believers the strength to resist temptation, to fight back against the darkness.
And the church itself, it was more than just a building, right?
Oh, much more. It was seen as one body, united by the Holy Spirit, and within that body, you had the saints.
Right, the saints, they played a huge role in this whole system.
They did. They were seen as these super-powered intercessors, constantly pleading with God on humanity's behalf.
Even more powerful than angels.
Some thought so, yeah. And they weren't just off doing their own thing. Their good deeds, their prayers, they all went into this spiritual treasury.
A cosmic bank account of good deeds.
Exactly. And the church could draw on that treasury to grant forgiveness, to help souls escape purgatory.
The monks, those guys holed up in their monasteries, they were like the spiritual investors, weren't they?
You could say that. They were constantly adding to that spiritual capital.
So we've got the Mass, the saints, this cosmic treasury. It sounds like the church had a pretty solid defense strategy.
It did. And remember, they saw themselves as God's kingdom on earth. The Pope was his representative, wielding spiritual authority that could even challenge kings and emperors.
Challenging earthly rulers, that's pretty bold.
Well, they believed the church had a higher calling, a moral responsibility to speak truth to power, to remind those in power of their duty to the poor and the weak.
Okay, so the church was this powerful force, fighting for humanity's salvation. What about knowledge? How did they view that?
With a lot of caution, honestly. They believed true knowledge, the kind that led to salvation, it came from divine revelation.
So not from poking around in the natural world or thinking too hard about things.
Not exactly. They were wary of human reason. They thought it was corrupted by the fall, prone to errors and easily led astray.
It could lead to heresy.
Exactly. Faith was the only sure guide. Faith in the church's teachings.
So philosophy and reason, they were totally out.
Not entirely. Scholasticism, it was allowed, but only within the strict boundaries of church dogma.
So they could use logic and reason, but only to support the church's teachings, not to question them.
Right, and they had this sense that, well, the world was getting worse.
Yeah.
That sin and corruption were spreading.
So it felt like humanity was losing the war against evil.
To some extent, yeah. Which made the church's role even more vital. It was the only thing holding back the darkness.
Okay, so we've talked about the church's big picture strategy, but Rydberg also gets into some of their more practical, hands-on magic.
Right, the everyday magic of the church, the stuff that people actually used in their daily lives.
Like holy water. That seems like it was pretty much the medieval Swiss Army knife of spiritual tools.
Oh, absolutely. Holy water was everywhere. They used it for everything.
Give us some examples. What was it good for?
Cleansing, protection, warding off evil. You name it. Baptism, of course, that was essential. Washing away original sin, bringing you into the church's protection.
And they saw pagan rituals, like the Mithras mysteries, as just cheap knockoffs of baptism.
Exactly. Diabolical counterfeits. But holy water wasn't just for people either. They sprinkled it on fields to protect crops, gave it to animals to keep them safe from witchcraft.
And when you were on your deathbed, they'd give you the last rites, anoint you with holy oil.
Right. Preparing your soul for the afterlife. It was like a spiritual send-off.
But it wasn't just rituals. They also had these magical objects, right? Amulets, charms, things like that.
Oh, yeah. Tons of them. And the church was right there, selling them.
Like what?
Well, there were these things called conception billets. Little pieces of paper consecrated by a priest.
And what were those supposed to do?
They could heal you, protect you from witchcraft, even keep your beer from spoiling.
Seriously, keep your beer from spoiling.
That was the idea, yeah. Rydberg actually includes the prayer they used to consecrate them.
So it was like a spiritual recipe for good luck.
Basically, you invoke the power of the Trinity, ask for protection from the devil, and bam, instant magic paper.
And then there were relics. Pieces of saints' bodies, things they touched. Those were big too, right?
Hugely important. They were seen as these conduits of divine power, capable of working miracles, warding off demons.
So the closer you were to a saint, even just their stuff, the more protected you were.
Exactly. And saintly images, too. Statues, paintings, they were seen as having a direct connection to the saint themselves.
Like a spiritual hotline. And the church, they were the ones who controlled all this, right? They were the ultimate source of magical power.
That's right. They saw themselves as the true physicians, healers of both body and soul. They used prayers, laying on of hands, exorcisms, holy relics, all sorts of stuff.
And each saint, they had their own specialty, right? Like Saint Valentine was the patron saint of epilepsy.
That's right. And St. Hubert, he was the go-to guy for rabies. They even had these special Hubertus bands and Hubertus keys that people used to ward off the disease.
And if you thought you're possessed by a demon, well, there was only one place to turn.
The church, exorcism was their domain, and they weren't too keen on secular medicine either.
Too worldly, not spiritual enough.
Pretty much dissection, frowned upon, doctors, suspect. There were all these church councils forbidding priests from practicing medicine.
Stick to the spiritual stuff, guys.
That was the message. And it wasn't just healing. They also thought they could control the weather.
The weather.
They believed demons could cause storms, droughts, all sorts of things. So they'd hold processions, chant litanies, even bury a donkey to try to appease the heavens.
Bury a donkey. Now that's a new one.
Hey, desperate times call for desperate measures, right? And it wasn't just big stuff like the weather. They even took those pesky field rats to court.
Seriously, court.
Oh, yeah. Full-blown legal proceedings, complete with lawyers for the rats.
I guess you could say they took their law and order serious.
No kidding. And they had these intense prayers, these formulas of malediction that were basically like spiritual curses.
Talk about weaponized prayer.
Right. It was all about power, projecting that divine power out into the world. They even believed the Pope could banish comets with his prayers.
Talk about cosmic clout.
Exactly. And the monasteries, those were like the front lines in this spiritual war. The monks were like these master magicians, churning out holy objects, battling demons left and right.
A spiritual arms race. And they even managed to weave their magic into the legal system, didn't they?
Oh, yeah. Trial by ordeal, all those tests of fire and water. They were all carefully regulated by the church.
To make sure God was on their side.
Right. And torture. Even torture was brought under the church's umbrella.
They thought God would protect the innocent from feeling pain.
Exactly. They'd even bless the torture instruments. And the witch hammer, that was the culmination of it all. A handbook for hunting witches, sanctioned by the Pope himself.
It's crazy to think that this was all happening, this obsession with witches and demons.
It was a dark time. But Rydberg makes a good point. He says, magic, in this medieval context, it was anything that was thought to have power in and of itself, like a holy relic or a consecrated amulet.
So it was about external power, something outside of yourself.
Right. And the Reformation, it was all about shifting that power back inwards.
Back to individual faith and conscience.
Exactly. Though even then, that whole good versus evil, God versus the devil thing, it stuck around.
Dualism dies hard.
I guess so. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. There's another side to medieval magic we need to explore.
The magic of the learned, the scholars, the alchemists, the guys who wanted to understand the secrets of the universe.
Right. They were like the intellectuals of the magic world. And the medieval universities, those were their stomping grounds.
Places where you could spend hours debating the finer points of theology.
Oh, yeah. They'd argue about everything. The purpose of the head, what Peter did with the Eucharist on the cross, all sorts of incredibly specific stuff.
It sounds a bit, well, esoteric.
It was. But for some, it wasn't enough. They wanted more. Deeper knowledge, hidden wisdom.
They were like the proto-scientists, in a way, trying to uncover the secrets of the universe.
Right. And Rydberg quotes Faust here, that lament about wanting to tear away the veil from the goddess Isis, to see the truth behind everything.
So that was the goal of the learned magician, to see what was hidden, to understand the true nature of things.
Exactly. And they weren't just armchair scholars. They were practitioners, experimenting with alchemy, studying astrology, trying to make contact with spirits.
Trying to gain control over the forces of nature.
Right. They wanted to understand how the universe worked, and then to use that knowledge to achieve their goals.
Rydberg even gives us a glimpse into what a magician's workshop might have looked like.
It's a fascinating image. Imagine a room filled with strange objects, planet medallions, magical rings, amulets, even pieces of electrum, that naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver.
Sounds like a pretty eclectic collection.
Oh, and there's more. Preserved animal parts, herbs, weird stones, ancient weapons, all arranged according to their astrological significance.
Like a magical museum.
And of course, no self-respecting magician would be without his observatory. They spent a lot of time studying the stars, trying to decipher their messages.
Because they believed the stars influenced everything down here on Earth.
Exactly, it was all connected. And they saw themselves as guardians of this ancient wisdom.
They believed true knowledge came from the distant past.
Right, they thought that over time, wisdom had become corrupted, fragmented, and it was their duty to preserve what was left.
Like intellectual archaeologists, piecing together the fragments of a lost world.
They even saw Noah's Ark as this repository of ancient knowledge, this time capsule from a more perfect age.
So they saw themselves as part of this long lineage of wisdom keepers.
A lineage that stretched back to Zoroaster, the Eleusinian mysteries, even Plato and Aristotle.
It's fascinating how they blended Christian ideas with these older pagan traditions.
They were synthesizers, taking bits and pieces from everywhere, and they always emphasized the importance of faith.
Faith in God, faith in their own abilities, faith in the power of magic.
Right. They believed that without faith, their magic wouldn't work. They saw astrology and the summoning of spirits as proof that their system was correct.
So how did their system actually work? What were the underlying principles?
Well, they saw the universe as this triple harmony of the elemental, the celestial, and the spiritual. Everything was connected. The stars influenced the elements. Objects had sympathies and antipathies. Numbers and letters held hidden meanings.
It was like a giant cosmic web.
Exactly. And the magician, he was like the spider at the center of it all, manipulating the threads.
Rydberg actually describes watching a magician summon a demon. Sounds pretty intense.
Oh, yeah. It was a whole ritual. Skulls, bones, weapons, red drapery, a fire altar, incense burning everywhere.
Creating the right atmosphere, I guess.
The magician himself, he'd be dressed in special robes, holding his book of incantations, standing inside a magical circle drawn on the floor.
For protection, right?
To keep the demon from getting to him, and then he'd start chanting, invoking the names of God and angels.
Powerful stuff.
Rydberg says the air changed, the incense smoke turned red, you could hear thunder in the distance, and then, after the magician called the demon's name, a shadowy figure appeared.
It must have been terrifying.
Rydberg says he fainted dead away. But it just goes to show how seriously they took this stuff.
They weren't just messing around. They were dealing with forces they believed were very real and very dangerous.
Exactly. And Rydberg, he calls these guys restless Faust natures. Always searching, always pushing the boundaries.
And sometimes they paid the price for their curiosity.
Yeah. Like Campanella, Vanini, Bruno, they all challenged the dogma of their time, and they were persecuted for it.
It's a reminder that progress, especially in the realm of knowledge, it doesn't always come easy.
It doesn't. But their ideas, their willingness to question, it helped pave the way for the Renaissance.
And ultimately, for our own scientific worldview.
Right. It's a good reminder that what we believe to be true, it's not always the whole story. There's always more to discover.
Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the magic of the common folk. And the churches, well, sometimes rather aggressive, campaign against it.
Ah, yes, the battle between white magic and black magic.
The church's magic was the good stuff, powered by God, and everything else. That was the devil's work.
Precisely. But it wasn't always that clear-cut, was it?
The Greeks, they saw magic as just another part of the natural world. There wasn't this good versus evil thing.
Right. But Christianity, with its roots in dualism, it brought this moral dimension to magic.
And when Christianity spread through Europe, it clashed with all these existing pagan beliefs.
It was a messy process. Sometimes the church tried to stamp out the old ways. Other times, they tried to absorb them.
Pagan gods became demons. Festivals were rededicated to Christian saints.
Right. But people still held on to those old beliefs, those old ways of doing things. It was a blend of the old and the new.
Even some priests were caught honoring both pagan deities and Christian figures.
It's funny, isn't it? It's like they were hedging their bets, just in case.
And the church, they weren't always super strict, were they?
No, they were pretty pragmatic about it. Especially in the early days, they knew they couldn't force people to give up everything all at once.
So they let them keep some of their traditions, but gave them a Christian spin.
Right, those nature spirits. They became fallen angels. Those old rituals, they were reinterpreted as ways to ward off evil.
And that created this whole tangled web of superstitions.
Exactly. Like Rydberg says, a labyrinth of superstition.
And it's interesting how the church demonized pagan magic. They were basically doing the same thing the Neoplatonists did to Apollonius of Tyana.
Right. They labeled him a sorcerer because his magic wasn't aligned with their beliefs. It just goes to show how much power perspective has.
The church's magic was the good stuff, everyone else's was bad. And that fear of the devil, it really took hold in the Middle Ages.
It did. It permeated everything. Even the Pope was afraid of sorcerers.
And it all culminated in that witch hunt craze in the 15th century.
The trial of the Templars, Pope Innocent VIII's bull against witchcraft, the witch hammer. It was a terrifying time to be alive.
Especially if you were a woman who knew a little bit about herbal medicine.
Right. You were basically guaranteed to be labeled a witch. And that papal bull, it gave the inquisitors incredible power.
They could basically do whatever they wanted.
Pretty much. No appeals, no oversight. And the witch hammer, that was their guidebook. It laid out all the supposed signs of witchcraft, all the ways to identify and punish witches.
Rydberg calls it diabolical blindness, a complete loss of reason in the face of fear.
And it wasn't just about wishes. It was about controlling people, controlling knowledge. It stifled intellectual progress, created a climate of fear and suspicion.
And all because of this belief in the devil's power.
It's a reminder of how dangerous unchecked fear can be.
Okay, so let's talk about that popular magic.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the things people actually believed in and did?
Oh, there was a whole host of beliefs and practices. Some of them quite strange, some of them downright terrifying.
Like what?
Well, the mandrake, for example, that was a big one.
The mandrake. That's the plant with the root that looks like a person, right?
Exactly. They thought it could reveal secrets, bring good luck, even multiply money. But harvesting it, that was a dangerous business.
They thought it would scream when you pulled it out of the ground, and the scream could kill you.
Right. They'd use dogs to pull it up or plug their ears with wax. Anything to avoid that deadly scream.
And werewolves. Those were a real source of fear, weren't they?
Oh, yeah. The idea of men transforming into wolves, it was a common belief throughout Europe. Even Augustine thought it was real.
And then there were vampires. The undead rising from their graves to suck the blood of the living.
That one really terrified people. They'd go to great lengths to prevent corpses from becoming vampires. Stakes through the heart, decapitation, all sorts of things.
It's funny how some of those old beliefs, they still resonate with us today.
They do, don't they? We might not believe in them literally, but they still tap into something primal, something deep within our psyches.
But it wasn't just the big scary stuff. People had all sorts of everyday superstitions too.
Oh, yeah, tons of them. Rules about how to get out of bed, how to dispose of waste, what to do if you saw certain animals. It was all about avoiding bad luck.
Like a complex system of do's and don'ts.
Exactly. And they'd use all sorts of things for divination. The flight of birds, the entrails of animals, even just the way a flame flickered.
Trying to get a glimpse of the future.
Right. And they had their own folk medicine, too. Herbs, charms, rituals. They even thought they could measure sickness or drag it out of someone's body through a hole in a tree.
It sounds a bit out there, but I guess when you're desperate, you'll try anything.
And of course, there was harmful magic, too. Curses, hexes, love spells gone wrong.
People were afraid of the evil eye, the power of envy and malice to cause harm.
Right. And they'd use witch knots to bind their enemies, make dolls to transfer diseases, all sorts of things.
And even though the church condemned magic, they couldn't completely stamp it out.
No, it was too ingrained in the culture. People needed those rituals, those beliefs, to make sense of the world, to feel like they had some control over their lives.
Rydberg mentions these wandering scholastics, these traveling students who sold charms and did divination.
Right. They were like the bridge between learned magic and folk magic, taking those highfalutin ideas and making them accessible to the common folk.
And they were probably the inspiration for the Faust legend, too.
Quite possibly, those guys who dared to seek forbidden knowledge, to make deals with the devil.
It's fascinating how all of this intense belief in magic and demons, it was happening at the same time as the Renaissance.
Right. When all those classical ideas about reason and human potential were being rediscovered.
It's like two worlds colliding, the old and the new.
And in the end, the new world won out.
At least for a while.
True. But it's a good reminder that progress isn't always linear. We have to be vigilant, to keep questioning, to keep pushing the boundaries of knowledge.
Otherwise, who knows? We might find ourselves slipping back into those old ways of thinking.
It's a thought-provoking idea, isn't it?
It is. And that's what makes studying history so important. It helps us understand where we came from and where we might be headed.
Exactly. So, what have we learned today? What are the key takeaways from our deep dive into the magic of the Middle Ages?
Well, for me, it's the power of belief. How those beliefs, however strange they might seem to us now, shaped their entire world, their cosmology, their society, their everyday lives.
Right. Magic was everywhere. It was woven into the fabric of their reality.
And the church, they were the gatekeepers of that magic. They used it to control, to protect, to offer hope in a world that often felt very dark and dangerous.
Yeah. It's a stark contrast to our own worldview, isn't it? Where science and reason reign supreme, or so we like to think.
Which brings us to our final question for you, dear listeners. What are the unseen forces that shape your world? What beliefs, what assumptions, what fears guide your actions, even if you're not fully aware of them?
Something to ponder.
It is. And that's what the deep dive is all about. Making you think, making you question, making you explore the hidden depths of our world, both past and present.
So thank you for joining us on this journey into the magic of the Middle Ages. We hope you found it enlightening, maybe even a little bit unsettling.
And please do keep exploring. There's a whole world of fascinating and sometimes terrifying books out there just waiting to be discovered.
Until next time, stay curious.
And don't forget to join us for our next deep dive into the mysteries of the past, right here on The Deep Dive.